first thing I want to talk about is the rezoning of 394 College Street. We're going to take a quick look at a video of John Hill talking about this on our media scrum last week, and then we'll come back and discuss what he has to say and sort of get through the situation and how it resolved.
Around 394 College Street that have come out very strong, packed the galleries in every instance, and I was particularly interested in it because I think it really sets up what a political scientist would look to as being a real way to read what councillors do at a council meeting. They wanted to put one apartment in the basement and then 4 apartments in the upper stories. And went through all the planning committees and so forth. And planning recommended that the project go ahead with a rezoning of the building to what they call a 4R zoning rating, which is for multiple rental units. Presently it's zoned 3R, but 3R would probably not allow that many units. So at the last 3 council meetings, delegations showed up protesting the change of zoning from 3R to 4R. And the delegations came in with some very valid points, and staff responded with equally valid points. And it was a situation where both sides gave a really good debate on the issue. And hearing one side or hearing the other, it was sometimes hard to decide who's going to be the winner in this.
Right.
Well, as it got further and further down, after the second council meeting, they decided to defer it and have staff draw up another report. Staff came back at the last council meeting with a report saying, no, it should remain 4R. But the community group came along and said, well, we would be willing to accept the 5 units going in, but maintain the 3R. So obviously there was a compromise on the table. This whole thing would be accomplished. It's just whether it would be a 3R or a 4R. And as it got down to it, the basic principles involved doesn't really matter. It was a distinction without a difference. Council had to decide whether we're going to do the compromise and bend to the will of the community people that came forward and say it will be 3R, but with the allowance that 5 units be put in, or go with staff and say it will be 4R and allow the 5 units to be installed in the building. This issue really got raised and brought into focus at these council meetings when the 4 of the councillors, Councillor Brian Darling wasn't present at the meeting, so he didn't take part in it. But 4 of the councillors and the mayor decided, yes, we will go along with staff. The only holdout was Councillor Suzanne Sagan that said, no, we should be listening to what the community says. And Deputy Mayor Henderson said, well, let's put in an amendment to make it 3R and everybody accomplishes or gets everything they want. That amendment was voted down. So the council and the mayor voted to do what staff wanted as opposed to what the community wanted, with only Councillor Sagan standing in opposition. So it was, I thought, a very interesting way we can develop, and it would be very important in the next election as to what people want. Are they going to vote for candidates that will represent the community, or are they going to say, no, we want you because we trust in your judgment to do what's best for the community?
Okay, we're going to discuss that further, what John had to say, but right now we have a phone call. Okay. I believe Ted Williams is on the line. Good evening, Ted. Thank you for calling Municipal Matters. You're live with Cobourg Mayor Gil Brocanier.
Yes, I have a question about the rezoning of 394 College Street.
Okay, go ahead.
This rezoning is really a local neighborhood issue. It's much the same as the Abbott Street sidewalk. Residents in the east end of the town are unaffected. You know, residents in New Amherst are unaffected. The only people that are really affected is the immediate neighborhood to that property. Since the neighbors were overwhelmingly against it, I want to ask the mayor why he voted for it.
Okay, so First of all, I wouldn't say the neighbors were overwhelmingly against it, because we did talk to a number of people on College Street who said they had no problem with it whatsoever. Now, the reason that I supported it, the R4 zoning, was because the planning report was based on sound planning principles. So if you take a look at the provincial policy statement, it mandates intensification. If you take a look at the Planning Act, the Planning Act mandates council to follow the provincial policy statement. And so if we had turned down the R4 application and it went to OMB, if the proponent wanted to take it OMB, we didn't have a leg to stand on. Our own lawyer told us that if you turn it down, now you have to go to the OMB and present your case, and you would have to find a planner who could argue that the provincial policy statement's wrong, the county official plan's wrong, and Cobourg official plan's wrong. And I just felt that would be a terrible waste of money, of taxpayers' money, to go through an exercise you don't have a hope of winning, and it costs you a lot of money. And so the lawyer that told me that is 30 years experience in municipal law.
Ted, does that answer your question?
It does to some extent, but the whole issue of intensification, people move from Toronto to Cobourg because Cobourg is a beautiful town. Why should Cobourg listen to what Queen's Park in Toronto dictate to us in terms of intensification? Like, why do we, if they say we need to jam up our neighborhoods and intensify and take away some of our larger property, why do we have to listen to them? I mean, I don't think the residents of Cobourg want to intensify. I don't think they want to jump every time Toronto puts out a mandate.
Well, we don't have to, Ted, but the truth is, it's up to us to determine where it's appropriate. And so in the town of Cobourg, it's not appropriate everywhere. Like, it would be more appropriate in a lot of locations in a city, than it would be in Cobourg. So we do it where we think it is appropriate. In this particular case, the planner said, the planner wrote the report. And again, if I refer to the lawyer that I talked to, he said it was one of the finest planning reports he's ever seen. So in this particular case, it was an appropriate thing to do. The intensification was right for that particular property. And the 5 units, it was certainly more than acceptable. They're going to be quality rental units. It's not like it's going to be rooming house or boarding house. As a matter of fact, when people say we weren't listening to the public, we were. Their main concerns were they didn't want to see a boarding house, they didn't want to see a rooming house, and they didn't want to see a B&B. And so we made sure that when we did the R4 was specific to just residential and didn't allow those other uses that they were concerned about.
Ted, thank you very much for your phone call. We appreciate you calling and asking your questions and your comments. Yeah, I mean, what Ted just brought up there is legitimate. It's like Toronto, big city, the province. I mean, we're a bit of a different, every town is going to be a little bit different.
That's right.
But I mean, that is the way our system is set up. I guess there is some wiggle room, as you mentioned, in there to make different decisions. But I mean, to some point, and from legal advice, your hands are kind of tied. 289-252-0674 if you have a question for Cobourg Mayor Gil Brocanier. So tell us a little bit more about 394 College Street and how this came about, and really more so how council weighed both options that they had.
So the proponent of the owner of 394 College Street asked for rezoning. So the Municipal Act requires, or the Planning Act requires, that we have a public meeting. So we had the public meeting, which allowed everyone to have their voice on what they thought about the 394 College Street rezoning for R4. And so there was a small group of people from College Street that came forward, and they were very vocal about being really opposed to it. And there were a few people who spoke in favor of it. As the whole thing evolved, I mean, we did get some, all of council got some emails, phone calls and whatnot opposed to it, but then it started to get more and more, it twisted more the other way, where the people who were supporting 5 residential apartments were outnumbering the people who were opposed to putting anything in there.
Right.
Now, the people who were opposed to it were suggesting that, oh no, we think you know, we think, well, maybe they should look at turning it into 3 condos. And we're okay with 3 apartments, but not 5 apartments.
Right.
So those are some of the arguments that council had to decide. But they also had first the initial planning report by our manager of planning services, Rob Franklin. And then out of the public meeting, there were a lot of questions put forward by the public who don't really understand the planning process. And so Rob issued a second report addressing every one of the points that were brought up at the public meeting.
Right, and one of the persons I believe that was opposed to this that lives in the area is Emily Charlie. She joins us on the phone right now. Okay. Hi Emily, thank you very much for calling Municipal Matters. You have a question for the mayor.
Yes, I do. Thank you. Mayor Brocanier, you refuse to recuse yourself from...
I'm sorry, Emily. Can you just speak up a little bit, please?
Now, how can you claim this application has been treated fairly when so many things suggest otherwise? So, for example, the planning department admitted they did not properly notify local residents of the application. So that includes 92 households which should have been notified, and they were not notified by the town. That includes the townhouse immediately next to the property. Also, there was no sign placed on the property to notify the general public of the rezoning application. The fiancé of your niece was also a member of the town's Planning and Sustainability Advisory Committee when she submitted the application for rezoning. Now, on August 19th, you did a drive-by of my house after I circulated flyers opposing the rezoning application. And on the same afternoon, you were also seen talking to your niece outside the subject property. Now, I wonder if you give this kind of treatment to every rezoning application. And you denied our delegation the opportunity to speak at the council meeting on August 21st. Now, how can you claim this has been an impartial process, and what will you do to restore public trust?
Okay, so first of all, I want to clarify that the town met its obligations in notifying the public. So the Planning Act requires that we put a notice in the paper, you know, at a certain time period before the public meeting, and to notify the public. And that's what we did. In the town of Cobourg, we have taken upon ourselves to also mail out notifications to people in the area. And there was a failure in the system in terms of not having all of the addresses of people in condominiums and so on. So they didn't get the mail out, which is an optional thing that we do to try and make sure everybody, you know, gets a personal notification. But that's not a requirement of the Planning Act. So we met all the obligations of the Planning Act. Now I'm just saying, so what was your second question there, Emily?
Well, there were a number of things that suggest that this process has not been fair and equitable, and one of them is that you were seen outside of the property speaking to your niece, outside of the subject property, and that was on the same day that I circulated flyers of opposition. That's when you were in a car which stopped in front of my home, identifying where I live. Now, I considered that, I interpreted it to be an act of intimidation, and I'd like to know if that is something that you do for every rezoning application.
I missed that, George.
She's saying that the fact that you were there in front of her house by 394 Margaret Street was the same time that she was distributing flyers, and she's looking at that or interpreting that as possibly an act of intimidation.
No, I wasn't in front of her house when she was distributing flyers. I was. I happened to be driving by. My wife and I were driving by, and I saw my sister-in-law walking, and I stopped and asked her if she needed a ride.
Emily on the line with us with some questions for the mayor. Emily, you said you had more questions to ask?
Go ahead, Emily.
Perhaps the mayor would like to explain why he denied our delegation the opportunity to speak. The council meeting on August 21st.
The reason, and you know, that's the only delegation I've ever turned down in my almost 7 years as mayor. And the reason that I didn't allow the delegation was because we had the public meeting, and the person who wanted to come forward as a delegation to council had already made his presentation at the public meeting. So we didn't need to hear the same presentation twice within a 40 to 45 minute period. And that was the only reason I turned it down.
Yes, I'm afraid that the problem with that is that we as local citizens have no voice in the council meeting unless we register as a delegation. And it could be that we wanted to respond to things that we heard from council during the public meeting, seeing how they were back to back. That would have given us a chance to respond. Mm-hmm. Also, I think it's interesting that last year suggestions were made that council should have a question and answer period, and the response of council to that suggestion was that there is no need because the public can speak at the committee of the whole meeting as well as at council meetings.
Emily, I'm glad you brought that up because that is a topic that we are going to discuss later on in the show is about that, the possibility of a question and answer period.
Yes.
Emily, I thank you very much for your phone call tonight.
There is one other question that
Sure.
I have from a local resident. They would like to know why the town insisted on the R4 designation against the wishes of nearly all the local residents when an R3 exception could have done the job.
Well,
I.e., was there a reason besides making the property worth more money and making it easier for a later severance?
no, it was because the application specifically asked for an R4, and if you recall Rob Franklin's first report, he completely supported the R4 designation, and if the proponent, if we had turned down the R4 and gone to an R3 special, the proponent still had the opportunity to take it to OMB against the town, and then we would not have a leg to stand on. As I said earlier in the show, if you were watching, our legal expert said, if you turn it down, you'll have to find a planner that can say the provincial policy statement is wrong, the official plan is wrong, and the Cobourg official plan is wrong.
Yes, but it is the job of council to incorporate the concerns of local citizens into the decision-making process. Otherwise, council will simply approve every proposal brought forward by a developer out of fear for the OMB.
Well, no, that's not true. We have turned down other proposals, and we have gone to OMB on several issues. So it's not that we approve everything. We only approve the ones that we think are fitting